you get filled with resentments. As you keep bringing up stuff and nothing gets solved over and over, you are starting to fill your heart with resentment, right? And another thing that happens in these relationships is repetitive arguments. That is like a hamster wheel, right? You just feel like you are going round and round and round and talking about the same old stuff in the same old way, and nothing seems to get resolved.
Welcome to Heal Your Relationships. This podcast is all about healing your marriage and your other close relationships without waiting for the people around you to change. I'm your host, Dr. Kavita Sun. Let's dive in.
Hey, welcome. This is Kavita. I am a double board-certified psychiatrist and a physician's relationship coach and creator of HYR, our 90-day Heal Your Relationships from the Inside Out program. I'm super excited to be with you. I made a little video for you that goes over how to actually create the love and legacy that you and your family desire, and the 9 tools that you need to master to be able to get there. Okay? So let me show you what that's about. So the 9 core strategies that we talk about fit into 3 main things that you need to be able to have a loving, calm, peaceful, playful, joyful, passionate relationship that everyone frankly deserves and should have. It is not that hard to be able to create that. It's just that we don't know the tools, no one teaches us, and we end up just repeating whatever we saw, or we go right opposite to the very other end of the spectrum. And either way, it ends up being an imbalance. So we just need the right tools. The first part of this is the build unshakable core. Okay, your inner core, being able to stay calm even if there's a storm around you, and feel like you have healed your own past wounds, so you're not constantly triggered by every look and roll of the eye or the tone of someone around you. If you are constantly triggered like that, right, you're going to walk around like a raw nerve, which makes it impossible for you to be able to have the emotional flexibility and the resilience that you need to be able to not just create connection with the family that you want, but pass on the legacy that you want to the next generation. So the next one is learning how to dissolve conflict, right? Conflict, it's a doorway to connection, just like a door, right? It can either separate 2 rooms, like if you slam a door shut, it can separate rooms. But if you open it, it can actually create connection between 2 rooms. So conflict is just a door. You get to decide if you can learn the tools to actually open the door instead of slamming it shut. So that's a core principle. And then how to restore connection. Right? We all get married because we are having a good time with this person. We feel like we can be ourselves with them. We feel like we're, partners in crime. And then somewhere along the way, life just gets in the way, and disappointments and hurts and resentments get in the way. And before you know it, you're either arguing or walking around in strained silence. So we need to restore connection. Now, there are 9 tools that I talked about. But 9 tools is not a crash course, right? So we're going to pick one that, frankly, is one of the most important ones, the one that I hear repeatedly people struggling with, and it may be something that you're struggling with right now, which is the prevention and de-escalation of conflict. What I mean by that is, when we don't know how to do this, then we have no idea why our partner gets annoyed or snippy. We don't know when some conversations seem to go okay and some of them just turn into, rubbing up against each other and stepping on each other's toes, or into this sort of shut down silent war, right? When you don't know how to prevent those kind of situations from going downhill, that means you don't know how to de-escalate in the moment. So something comes up and you both go into your automatic dance, and before you know it, there's another outburst. That is a big thing that we're going to talk about today. When we think about conflict, right, there are 5 conflict styles, okay, that we all fall into. One of them is called tantrum toddler. Now, this goes from aggressive, overtly aggressive, to covertly aggressive over here. On this side of the spectrum is covertly aggressive, is passive aggressive. This end is overtly aggressive. There's no better or worse one. We all can identify ourselves in all of these. But what I want you to do is, as I describe them, think about one particular relationship and then think about just the last few months, and you'll be able to pick the top two that you have been resorting to in the last 6 months in that one relationship. So the first one we're going to talk about is tantrum toddler. Okay, this is the person who gets really loud and critical, maybe even has some contempt, some sneer in your voice. You're constantly nagging and poking. You have to finish an argument right then and there. So you insist that you talk it out, even if it's 2 hours. Maybe you follow the other person or cry, right? So that's a tantruming toddler. That's one way that some of us may act or react when we feel hurt or overwhelmed. Another way is defensive Diana. This is the person that is tolerating things just barely until the other person has a complaint, and then she loses it. She's like, what the F? I have been being so gracious and not even telling you all of this other stuff that you're doing, and you're going to complain about me? Let me tell you all the ways that you are, messing up. That's defensive Diana, right? The third one is Martyr Mary, right? We've all been Martyr Mary at some point in our lives, which is the person who thinks that the entire house is resting on their shoulders, right? So you might say things like, my spouse is just another child. I'm just exhausted all the time. I feel like I have 3 children instead of 2 children and a partner. I have to do everything. If I don't do something, they will literally live in filth until they die, right? And what happens is that you have unintentionally, obviously, set up a parent-child relationship with your spouse. So once you've taken the parent role, there's only one role left for him or her to take, which is the child role. And oftentimes that is a very sort of one-sided role, and it's exhausting and breeds resentment. So that's Martyr Mary. The fourth one is timid Tina. This is the person who is so worried about setting off their partner that they sort of emotionally and physically tiptoe around the house, hope to, say the right thing. If things erupt, then you start ruminating later on about, I should have said it this way. Maybe I should have waited. He wasn't in a good mood. She looked upset already. Why did I say that? Right? Beating yourself up and trying to be sort of pleasing enough or perfect enough. And there's a big range, right? It's not that all of us are 100% all the time like that, but when we get triggered or challenged or feel scared or hurt, we may swing towards the timid Tina. And the final one is shutdown Sue. This is a person who's like, you know what, I'm done. This is hopeless. I'll just stick around until the kids are older and go off to college. And so what I'm going to do is try to avoid the person as much as possible. I'll go to bed at a different time. I will work later. If I'm home, I'll just occupy myself with the children and not make that much eye contact and not talk about anything important, right? So that's shutdown Sue. And shutdown Sue is when you're, acting like roommates. And tantruming toddler is when you are constantly in each other's spaces. Okay, this is all when we get triggered. All right, so with that, we are going to pick the tantrum toddler to talk about in this video, and I'm going to walk you through, 3 important parts of being a tantrum toddler and how to shift each of those parts. Okay, so the thing I want to touch on is tantrum toddler is mostly the behavior that we have when we're a tantruming toddler is either complaining or criticizing. The difference between complaining and criticizing is complaining is about the situation, right? Like, I wish you would wash the dishes. I wish you had done this. I wish you wouldn't do this, blah, blah, blah. Criticism is the worse older cousin of complaint, right? And this one is when we attach a character flaw to something like, oh my gosh, why are you so lazy? Or why are you so airheaded all the time? You never notice the things I say to you. So we attach a character flaw to our complaints. That's criticism. Now, there's even one step further, and that is contempt. Contempt is the evil older sibling. And, that's the one that has been directly linked to divorce, to an increased possibility for increasing the odds of divorce, right? Contempt is sort of a moral superiority. It's when we roll our eyes. It's when we think of ourselves as being better than, and the other person is either lazy or dumb or not funny or, not socially adept. And we have faith. We may sneer. We may go like that to our friends. So it often has a moral superiority and a body language of sneering associated with it. And that one, unfortunately, when we do fall into that, it's not that we want to, it's not that we're bad people. Anyone who has gotten stuck for many, many years and doesn't know how to solve it, has been filled with resentment and hopelessness, can then slide into contempt. Okay. And so it's really important to, if you are criticizing or having contempt, either one of those, right? We need to know how to shift away from that, because that's like a death knell, right? Okay. So with that, I'm going to shift to talking to you about contempt and criticism and how to shift out of that. What happens if this just continues and continues, right? Now, we can think of it as a timeline, okay? A timeline. And what happens is, if we continue down this path where there's a lot of complaints transforming into criticism and then touching on contempt, what happens when we go down that path is things go downhill. There's no other way that it can go. So you will go from feeling lonely, right? It is not pleasant to be the one who is feeling hurt and trying to solve things and constantly trying to bring things up, but the other person, in your opinion, is not able to listen to you or change or shift. And it's a very lonely experience. Another thing is you get filled with resentments. As you keep bringing up stuff and nothing gets solved over and over, you are starting to fill your heart with resentment, right? And another thing that happens in these relationships is repetitive arguments. That is like a hamster wheel, right? You just feel like you are going round and round and round and talking about the same old stuff in the same old way, and nothing seems to get resolved. There's nothing more frustrating than that. And when we continue doing these things, we end up in a power struggle, right? A push-pull, who's right and who's wrong, filled with blame. And we begin to regret having married this person, right? There's research to show that we actually look back on the beginning of our relationship and we might even rewrite history. Again, subconsciously, we don't know that we're doing it, but we will look back and say, I should have known. They were, red flags even back then. So regret that even stretches way back to the beginning of your relationship. And as I said, when it starts touching on contempt, it is correlated with increased chance for divorce. So we absolutely want to avoid this, okay? Now, what we want to do, on the other hand, is go this way. And what does that entail? That entails feeling calm in your body, right? Nothing gets you so riled up that you lose control of your frontal lobe. That's one aspect of the shift. The other one is knowing how to have empathy rather than sympathy. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. And the last one is friendship, knowing how to restore friendship. Okay. So when we have all this, you end up with the teamwork that you wanted in the first place. You wanted to feel like a team, and you can have that, but this is not the way to getting there. This is not the way to getting there. That is just going to end up here. And instead, I'm going to teach you this way so that you can get to a place where
Conflict is just a doorway to connection. Okay? Every argument becomes an opportunity, it becomes a doorway, and you feel even more connected, even more closer to this other person. All right? Okay, so how do we do that? There are 3 parts to healing contempt/criticism. Okay? One of them is what I call going from codependent to an interdependent relationship. I'm going to explain more about that and how to go about it, right? This is a big, big reason that people get into the criticism and the contempt and the tantruming toddler is the codependent nature of their relationship. And we need to be able to shift that. And we're going to talk about that. The next thing is, as we talked about, how to create empathy versus sympathy versus blame. Okay. And I'll tell you why that's important and how to do that in a minute. And the last one is to be able to stay calm inside so that you don't take one moment that is kind of not going so well and make it 10 times worse, where you escalate and the other person escalates. And before you know it, you're talking, about things that happened 5 years ago and saying things that you later regret. Okay, so let's talk about each of these. Ready? Okay. Now, the first one is codependent to interdependent, right? The way I think about this, okay, is the letter A to the letter H. Now, think about the letter A. This is the frame of the letter A. Do you see the push and pull up on top? Right? People are in each other's spaces. They're in each other's businesses. They're trying to tell the other person how to think and feel. They have a lot of expectations of what the other person should and shouldn't be doing for them. And that is the push and pull of a codependent relationship. Okay. What we want to get to is interdependent. That means each person is whole and feels steady and complete within themselves. And they can see the other person as a separate nervous system with different, biology and temperament and needs and longings and fears in any one moment. But the important thing is, it's not just 2 separate people. There is deep connection in between. Okay. That deep connection is what keeps the juice and the playfulness without it being a push and pull. Right? To go from an A to H relationship, there are 6 steps that we teach inside HYR. But for now, I'm going to tell you what the first step is. Okay? The first step is to find out, right, where you end and another person begins. Okay? Where do I end and where does another person begin? It sounds simple, but it's one of the hardest things to pinpoint and figure out in your specific situation, because your mind will trick you and say that what is actually not your space, your mind will tell you it is, especially the limbic part of your brain, which is concerned with survival and fear, will have you step into other people's spaces and not know where you end and the other person begins. So that is the first step that we get into when we're learning how to do this. Okay. Right. And I'll tell you an example. Okay. So I'm looking out onto my yard right now and I can see the fence between my yard and my neighbor's yard. Okay. Now, if I didn't realize that means that it's a separation, right? What if I told myself, no, he's not doing the flowers properly. He's not mowing the yard properly. He could do so much better. And because he's not doing it properly, it's bringing down the property value of, the entire block. So what I'm going to do is I am going to climb over the fence and go and mow his yard for him. Okay. I do that. And then the next week I'm like, oh, actually, what I should also do is plant some flowers, right? Before you know it, because I have neighbors on all sides, before you know it, I am literally the gardener for everyone around me.
And now I'm starting to be filled with resentment, and I'm trying to teach this other person what they should do. But guess what? Not only do they not listen to me, they actually seem pissed off that I am so-called trespassing. Okay. And I have no idea, right, that I have lost sense of where the fence is and where I end and the other person begins. I'm so filled with self-righteous indignation that I am determined to have my neighbors shift their gardens and yards rather than me scaling back. So that's something that we get into as tantruming toddlers, right? So in here, I want to tell you about one of our amazing clients, Laura Murch, Dr. Murch. Before she joined HYR, the weekend before that, she met with an attorney, okay, and was drawing up divorce papers. Then she went through HYR, and one of the things that she often talks about is not just that they're better, but that they are in the best place that they've ever been in more than 10 years. I think they've been together like 14, 15 years. In all of that time, she says, this is the closest and calmest and most playful they've ever been with each other. And one of the big ways that she did that was figuring out the 6 steps to go from a relationship to an H relationship. And it's just amazing to watch not just her and her husband and how that's changed things between them, but they have 5 children. And she often talks about, the legacy that I'm passing on to my children is completely different than what we have been passing on for the last few years, what was bothering my heart when I signed, when I joined HYR. So that's what we're trying to do in the A to H, codependent to interdependent. Okay. Now we're going to talk about the second part of this, which is empathy, right? So let's talk about how do we develop empathy? Okay. What does that even mean? How do you operationalize that? So with empathy, okay, what I want to tell you is, right, empathy is a position of equality, right? You see yourself as being equal to this person. So what I mean by that is it's a state of being rather than a state of doing. You can do the same exact thing from a place of empathy, and you can do the same exact thing from a place of sympathy or blame or control. So it's not what you do, it's the way of being when you're doing it, okay? If you are saying or doing that, feeling that you are both equal and knowing how to get to that point, then the same action will have a different consequence compared to if you do the same thing, but you're coming at it with anger, with blame, with control, with a sense of superiority, right? So empathy is about being equal, okay? Sympathy or control, blame, right, is about being superior, okay? And this is how I remember it. Empathy is equal. Sympathy or control is about being superior. Sympathy is when you're like, oh man, that poor thing, right? It's got that same sort of, I'm better than you, just listen to me. And it's got that same control, blame feeling to it. So it's a way of being, okay? Now, how do you get into this empathy and equal way of being, especially when you're upset, right? How do you do that? Now, before we go there, I want to tell you a little story, okay? I once read a story, I think I might have been in 4th or 5th grade, and it was in our English textbook, right? And I don't even remember the title of it, but this is how it goes. It stuck with me for years and years, decades, right? So this is how it goes. The scene opens in a bus, and there's this guy, he's, in his mid 30s or 40s, and he's got 3 children with him. And he's just kind of spaced out. He's staring out the window and lost in his own thoughts. And his 3 kids are running wild. Okay. They are, disturbing passengers, yelling, being rude, jostling people, whatever. They're being a handful and being really annoying. And so at one point, 2 of the passengers are talking to one another, and one person says to the other, what a terrible parent, like what's wrong with him? He cannot even notice what his kids are doing. He's not even present. I mean, no wonder the kids are running so wild. Like, this is terrible. He's just a bad example of a parent. Okay. And here's what happens. After a while, they both keep talking, and then one of them they just can't control it anymore, and they say to the parent, "Excuse me, sir, do you notice how crazy your kids are? They're really bothering all the passengers on the bus. Do you have any, responsibility, a sense of responsibility? You're the parent, we can't discipline them. Like, do you care enough to even notice?" And this man says, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I just kind of wasn't here. My wife just died in the hospital after a long battle with cancer, and we are on our way back home to pick some things up. So I haven't really been present, and I think the kids are sort of overwhelmed too and don't know how to act. I apologize. I will quieten them down." And in that moment, in that shift of I'm superior to, oh my God, I have felt the pain of that kind of loss. It may not be that your spouse passed away, but you have, by the time you're in your 30s and 40s, you have lost somebody you love to death in some way. So immediately you are now in an equal footing. Now, that doesn't mean you still don't ask this person to have his kids sit down or something. But do you see, the action doesn't matter. It's the way of being. It changes the whole outcome. Okay. So one tip, there are many, many ways to get from sympathy and control and superiority to empathy. One tip that I'll give you now is, when you're feeling that kind of superiority, ask yourself, when or where have I felt similar to this before? Okay, felt or done something similar before. So let's say you're super pissed off with your daughter or with your spouse or with your sister. Okay, and you're having all of these, she's this, she's that, she doesn't care, he is this, he's that, he's always been this, and you're working yourself up with a lot of blame and superiority. To come back into empathy, because that's the only way to influence anybody, right, is to ask yourself, when or where have I felt or done something similar? It doesn't have to be, and probably won't be, the exact same details, but the feelings and the dilemma and the sense of messing up is universal. We've all done that. And so when you can actually remember a time and really breathe into that with compassion for yourself, now you can see the other person with compassion and a sense of equality. You might still ask for whatever you need shifted, but the way you ask will come from love and respect, and not let me tell you what you should be or do. Okay? All right. So we call that connection before correction. Then the final one is how to be calm, right? The final one is how to be calm. And so we're going to touch on that and talk about that now. Okay. Now, the thing about keeping calm in any storm, right, is that you need to know how your nervous system works. Okay. Now, simplifying this a lot, we have a frontal lobe and we have a limbic system. Frontal lobe is the site of empathy, creativity, problem solving, compassion, all of these things, insight, right? The limbic system is the part of the brain that is responsible for telling us where dangers lie, so that we don't end up getting eaten by some wild animal and dying, right? So it is concerned primarily with survival. And the frontal lobe is primarily concerned with growth, contribution, and connection. Now, to be able to stay calm, you need to be able to see both you and the other person, your spouse or your daughter, whoever you're having this conflict with. You need to be able to see both of you as just two nervous systems that are overwhelmed in that moment. What does that mean? When a nervous system is overwhelmed, it means, and we see this in fMRI scans and research, that once you're overwhelmed, the limbic system takes over and you literally lose the functionality of the frontal lobe. It's just black, right? It's not lit. It's not online. So you are completely reacting
from an exaggerated sense of danger, which is what gets us into the anger and the blame and the pointing fingers and escalating, threatening divorce, all these things. So we need to be able to see that we're two nervous systems that have gotten overwhelmed. And the only way out is actually to calm your system enough so that your frontal lobe comes back on. You know, when you're flying over a city and it's nighttime and you see the lights flickering on, the frontal lobe literally flickers back on when we calm our physiology. Okay. And when both people can recognize that this is two nervous systems that have lost access to their frontal lobe, then they can use the techniques that we teach to be able to get back their frontal lobes. And now suddenly the conversation is very, very different. All right. So one way to do that is what we call recognizing your so-so moments. Okay. These are the moments where you're starting to feel a little tense, right? For some reasons, you know, somebody's facial expression changes or you're feeling a little poked, right? We all know that sometimes we have no idea why, but suddenly the air feels different between two people. And these are the so-so moments. Okay. This so-so moment is a moment of pregnant opportunity. Okay. This is when you can snowball into rumination, anger, and escalation, or you can interrupt this early on using some tools that we teach you so that so-so moments are recognized and shifted before you end up in, you know, a 2-hour argument about something that happened that you can't even remember from several years ago. And it might have started with just, you know, a disagreement about dishes or parenting, right? So we want to be able to interrupt these so-so moments. And there are lots of ways to do that. I want to talk to you about Nirali, one of our amazing clients. She is a physician in Canada. She trained in the US, went back to Canada. And when she joined and started to work with us, she would get, in her own words, so fucking pissed off. Okay. She would, before she knew it, get really anxious and amplified in her sympathetic overdrive, and things that, you know, today feel like small annoyances or things that need to be solved with creative solutions, back then, right, just 4 short months ago, would seem like life or death. Okay. And the way she would respond, and different people respond differently, we may either have very open boundaries, almost no boundaries at all, or we put up rigid wall-like boundaries. And she moved towards a rigid wall-like boundaries, which had her isolating herself and feeling more and more lonely. So when she understood how to create calm in any storm and manage her physiology and keep her frontal lobe on, right, she was able to then use the tools of connection so that the doorway, it becomes one of not further isolating and putting up walls, but actually honoring what you need while also using it as a moment and an opportunity to deepen your connection, right? So we talked about 3 different parts, right? We talked about codependent to interdependent, that's A to H. And we talked about Laura, who just is a master at this now. Then we talked about empathy and the superiority and the control that comes with that superiority versus empathy, which is an equal, and a question you can ask yourself to do that. I want to tell you about our amazing, amazing client, one of my favorite. All my clients are so awesome. Really, I meet the best human beings and physicians through this work. But I want to tell you about Lena. She is also a physician, mother of 2, really cares about her husband, who, in her own words, is a wonderful guy. And she would get to a overwhelmed and superior, you should do this, you shouldn't do that, micromanaging, controlling kind of, blaming kind of energy, without even knowing how that happened or why it happened. And then she would feel terribly guilty for the damage it did to the relationship and for the hurt that she would see in her partner's eyes. Not only that, she started noticing that her children were mimicking her behaviors towards her spouse. And that really, really broke her heart, because her spouse, you know, she does see him as a caring parent, right? So she then took the system of all the different tools we teach. One of them that I shared with you, which is where have I felt or done something similar before, and many others. And now she's in a place where she genuinely speaks from a way of being that is what we call coming from love, not for love. And there is respect and harmony in her relationship. And more than anything else, she often says that, my kids are now, they mention some of the HYR words and lingo, and they're starting to use it, which, there's nothing better than the gift of our children learning these tools early on, right? And in the calm system, right, we talked about Nirali, who's just, so amazing and would get really worked up and agitated and anxious and felt like it was life or death. So started putting up really strong boundaries, worsened their isolation, worsened their connection, and worsened her sense of loneliness. So now she actually still has boundaries, but there are places that people can come and go. There's flexibility in the boundaries, and she determines what that flexibility is so that she can still feel safe and she can see another person through her frontal lobe and not through her limbic system. Probably you're wondering, how did Kavita get into this? How did she figure all this out? And I want to tell you a little bit about how I came to be doing what I'm doing. I was raised in India, Southern India, and my dad was a physician, very famous, came from very humble beginnings, but had a really successful and rapid growth trajectory in his career, such that by the time I was 10 years old, we were living in, by Indian standards, as castle, and several cars, chauffeur driven to and from private school. And, it was just outwardly kind of a life that most people around me would have envied. And I get why, right? But precisely because of that, it also became a fortress. It became a prison, because we were supposedly living such a good life that no one dared to question or even ask about what was happening within the four walls. And what was happening within the four walls was not good. There was a lot of conflict, a lot of hurt, a lot of control, and so many things happened, but culminated in my mom committing suicide when I was 18. And it was a watershed moment in my life, and it prompted me to go into psychiatry. I'd already been interested in psychiatry, but I was determined to learn how brains work and what happens in relationships that can make or break a family, right? So fast forward, I end up in the United States. I do my residency at UConn, my fellowship at Children's Hospital in Boston. And again, from the outside, my life looks amazing, right? I have friends all over the world. I'm traveling. I mean, by all accounts, it looks like I've hit the jackpot, except I could not make my intimate relationships work. I can't tell you at least 3 important relationships that I lost because of, they would start off great and then sort of go downhill. And I didn't even know why or what. And each time I decided it was the other person until, after 3 losing relationships and a divorce, I was like, wait a minute, Kavi, you're the common denominator here. maybe there's something else going on. So that started my sort of rabbit hole into all of this work. And that was about 10 years ago. And then there came a point where I felt like I'd learned what I could from the Western models, and it had helped, but I hadn't solved. Okay. So I then went back to my Eastern roots. And I think it was about 6 years ago when I went for my first 12-day retreat in the mountains, a meditation retreat. And I've done so many since then, and really went deep into Eastern philosophy. And over time, I combined the best of what worked for me, really, with a lot of trial and error, mostly error. I managed to put together a system that in 90 days, quickly and effectively gets you from feeling overwhelmed and kind of blah and distant and maybe arguing to a place of peaceful playfulness and passionate relationship where you can talk about anything under the sun and resolve things and actually feel more connected than before you started the conversation. My goal, yes, I want to help you if you're watching this, right? I want to help you in your relationship, but even more so, I want to reach through you to the next generation, to the legacy that you're going to be passing on. By helping you heal and maximize the relationship that you have with your spouse and make it the best it possibly can be, that is the best legacy you can give to your children. In fact, whatever else you give them, right? If this is shaky, they are going to suffer. Trust me, I know, I've lived that. So the question I have for you is this something that you would like to learn? Is this something that you would like to improve in? I mean, we often, at least for me, right, I hear over and over, my family is the most important thing. My children are the most important thing. My relationships are the most sacred part of my life. And yet that's the part of our lives that is usually an afterthought. We only look at it when it's in terrible crisis, right? Until then, we're like, yeah, things will settle down when we move to the new house or when the kids grow up and blah, 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 blah. And we keep procrastinating on facing the reality that we are shaky in our foundation. So if you are wanting help with either stabilizing your relationship or getting it to a place where it's joyful, playful, and passionate, then just let us know. So thank you for hanging out with me. It's been a lot of fun, and I hope to see you on the inside.
Hey, if you enjoyed this podcast and you'd like access to our marriage repair toolkit, you can go to www.healyourrelationships, all one word, healyourrelationships.com, and look for free training. I'll see you there.